My name is Bob Dingman. I was an EM2 electrician's mate. I joined the Navy actually, I was born and raised in Syracuse, New York. Graduated from high school in 1965. Didn't go to college. Worked for about a year, and it was right part of the Vietnam War. So I got to be to the point where, you know, if I didn't decide about anything else, I'd probably get drafted. So I went down with a friend to the recruiting station in Syracuse and talked to the Navy representative that was there, signed up for the Navy, and I went in February of 1967 to boot camp, Great Lakes. It's quite a shock thing as far as, you know, you do what you're told, and you don't question pretty much don't question what you're told to do. You have a lot more, obviously, a lot more freedom. But, you know, after the initial part of boot camp, you get into the routine and you get into, you know, quickly make friends with your company and your company commander and the guys that are in your company, which a lot of ours were from central New York, but there were men from all over, probably all the Northeast, Middle Atlantic states that went to Chicago. So we had, I don't remember exactly how many were in our company, but back at that time during the Vietnam era, there were a lot of potential sailors going through boot camp. So you learn seamanship, you learn obviously you learn how to be a sailor, what it takes to stand a watch. You know, there's certain things that you do on every watch as far as what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to act. You learn to be punctual. You learn to be neat, be organized. You know, you have your whole life is contained in one sea bag. All your clothing you'll need for a whole year is in that one. Both winter and summer clothing is all in that one sea bag, which stands about this high and about that big around. I still have that sea bag at home. I have some of my uniforms. Most obviously don't fit anymore, but you have a Navy pea coat, you have all your clothes, it all fits into that one bag. So, and it all fits into one locker. You have a locker, you fold clothes a certain way. When you have inspections, it has to be folded a certain way. You learn to make your rack, which is your bed, a certain way. So a lot of it is just repetitive. Every day you do the same thing, and you learn how to be organized and how to live in a confined area, which is what you have on a ship. So they stress that you have to be able to, you and your division, you're in one berthing area, and you got your space and your space only. I went to boot camp till May. After that, because I was a high school graduate, they guaranteed me a school. I picked electrician, be an electrician. My father was an electrician, and he had taught me how to do wiring things. We built a camp up in the Adirondack Mountains, and he taught me how to do a lot of the construction and the wiring and things for the camp. So I figured that was a good field for me to go into, and I signed up for that, and I was awarded that school, electrician's mate school. So right after boot camp, except in May, went home for a week's leave, went back to Great Lakes, and went to electrician's mate, what they call A school. EMA school, went through electrical theory. There was actually two parts of it. There was what they call basic electrical and electronics, and that gave you a lot of theory stuff. So you learned electrical theory, amps and volts, and how to calculate the loads of things and stuff like that, and what different parts of the electrical circuits are called. The second part, electrician's mate A school part, you were taught more of the practical things of how to troubleshoot controllers, how to work with motors, change bearings in motors, things like that. More of the physical work that you would do day to day on a ship once you get assigned to a ship. Went through that, and then when it came towards the end of that, I had, you may have a lot of friends that you're with all the time when you're in the Navy, so guys that were in my class. Our teacher, our instructor, basically, on one day they get all your orders of where you're going to. So we started going down through all the orders, who was going where, which guy was going to what ship or shore, and there were three of us in my class that, as he was going through, he wound up with three people still left, and he says, now these three guys are either going to go to the best ship to be on, or they're going to go to the worst ship to be on. It's a newly reactivated ship, so these guys, you guys are all going to the battleship New Jersey. And he says you're either going to have a good captain who's going to realize that you're the only battleship and things are going to be nice and relaxed a little bit, or you're going to have a tough captain and everything's going to be, uniforms and inspections and all that. So he could go either way. We were lucky. We got the great captain who was a real, what they call sailor's sailor. So I went home on leave again, reported to the pre-commissioning unit of the battleship New Jersey here in Philadelphia at the Navy base, active Navy base back then. Got here on a Wednesday evening, got checked into the barracks. They put us all in the barracks. Got up, had breakfast, and the three of us walked down into the naval shipyard, walked around the corner, and there was this big, huge gray ship sitting in dry dock. The dry dock she was just in recently for her dry docking as a museum ship. So first time I saw her was that day, and I was there and on it all the time during her reactivation up to commissioning in Philadelphia in April. I knew absolutely nothing about the battleship before seeing her. I think I had built a model of one of the battleships way back when I was younger, but I couldn't even say that for sure. But you're not prepared for the size of it. You're not prepared as being your first ship to go onto a ship that size. A lot of guys get out of school or they go into the Navy and they get assigned to destroyers or smaller ships, and then a lot of them get assigned to aircraft carriers. All this, but being on a battleship was something new to everybody because there were no battleships in the Navy since the 1950s when they decommissioned them all, in Missouri, the Wisconsin, the Iowa, and in New Jersey, which were active during the Korean War. All were decommissioned. All were in what they call mothball state. So they were just tied to a pier and being preserved by naval personnel. So, all of a sudden you're on the only battleship in the world, basically. There's no other country had any. You were on this one ship. So I would say it took adjusting to it, but the easy part of the adjusting, I had nothing to compare it with. I hadn't been on another ship. So, this was my first ship, and it was what it was. So, and being on the pre-commissioning crew, there were only 200 sailors assigned to the ship during the pre-commissioning in Philadelphia. All the rest of the sailors that got assigned to the ship were sent to San Diego for different different schools, different firefighting schools, damage control schools, different things that they did. So the majority of the crew was sent to Philadelphia or to San Diego, and there was a small, what they call a nucleus crew in Philadelphia, which was about 200 sailors and maybe, I think, 50 officers, and our captain was in charge of the nucleus crew. The executive officer was out in San Diego. So you had a lot of time to explore because it was still all owned by the Navy, by the naval, what they call the yard, the Navy yard. So it wasn't a commissioned ship, and all the people that worked on it for the Navy were civilian union people. So you couldn't do things or they file a grievance against you because that was their job, not your job. So it was a little different, but it was interesting. The first time we walked on board, like I said previously, you walked around the corner of this building and there was this massive ship. sitting in this dry dock. So they were sitting on, out of the water, down on blocks. You could look down in and see it. And there was a gangways that walked on, but there was, at that time, it was just a mass of cables and piping and hoses running that ran compressors and all kinds. It was all the services. There was no power or anything on the ship. Everything came from the dry dock services. So you'd walk down corridors and you'd be ducking under hoses and electrical cables and all that. So it was quite a bit to get around. Plus the fact that it was such a large ship, you had to learn your way around, So it took a few weeks to just get acclimated to where we congregated our electricians that were on there. There were only about 25 of us, I think, and we met in what was called the power shop, which was the main electrical shop. That was the area that was turned over to us. So and being on there and lower rated, you didn't have a lot of things to be able to do. We didn't have a lot to do, so our first class or second class would say, well, do this and then wander around and learn the ship. And so we went from the bottom to the top, over 2 or 3 months that we were there, and just learned and explored and did what we could do, and but we were limited because of the condition or who owned the ship at that time. A lot of the crews would when it was the last crew, they would do, like, say, an engine room, electricians in the engine room, or what they call electrical distribution. They would do take a sheet of paper, and everybody with a marker would write down what the guy's name was, his rate, his hometown, or where he lived, and they would mount it somewhere and put some plexiglass over it and just leave it there, for people to see in the future, never knowing when it was going to be viewed. There was sailor art around of all different types, different crests and different symbols or whatever. The sailor art is pretty typical on a Navy ship, which is what they call it, is the sailor art. And you find something in some little remote corner of the ship somewhere where some guy drew something, and it could be whatever. It could be something for his girlfriend at home, or whatever. There's all kinds. It could have been a picture of the ship firing the guns, or depending on what division you were in, they would have artwork on their door or in the floor, or cut into the tiles and things like that. So their symbol for their rate. The electricians made the symbol is a globe, basically a globe of the earth is the electricians' make symbol. So that would be painted on a wall or stuck in a corner or whatever. The recommissioning ceremony was April 6th, 1968. All the sailors got tickets for their family. I think we were allotted four tickets for each of us, but there were guys that their family couldn't come. So I was able to. A couple guys gave me their tickets. So I had my mother, my father. They lived just north of New York City. We were down in Philadelphia, so it wasn't too far a drive. So I had my mother, my father, my older sister and her husband, my younger sister, and my aunt and uncle from Syracuse came down. My father's older brother, and all of them came down to the ceremony. The ship was tied up next to a pier in Philadelphia, and they had seating out on the pier for all the guests to come in, and there was seating on the ship for special guests, military guests. All the crew was on the ship during the commissioning. So we all were in our dress blues with a medal instead of just a ribbon. We had to wear, it was formal, so you had to wear your actual medal. Most of us younger guys, all we had was one medal. We hadn't been out to do anything too much. A lot of guys had tons of medals and tons of ribbons in this era, the older guys and the ones that have been around a long time. There was a Marine, there was a Navy band there, there was a group of Marines there for the ceremony. But then there were there was quite a few. We had the Navy Secretary of the Navy was our keynote speaker. Ignatius was his last name. I'm not sure what, Paul Ignatius, I believe. And our captain and all the officers and obviously many different admirals from different departments in the Navy and those in charge of the district we were in Philadelphia, that naval district. Everybody, it was a big thing to attend this commissioning of a World War II battleship, and the only active battleship in the world. So there were, I'm not sure exactly the numbers. I had heard there were 4,000 or 5,000 people there for that commissioning. So, and then they all got to come on board the ship. You had to sort of wait and watch for your parents to come, your family, and then you could take them around and show them the ship and that was quite impressive for my father was a lieutenant in the Army in World War II over in England and France. And he was actually on a ship crossing the Pacific when the war ended, and they turned the ship around and sent it back to, it was one of the Liberty ships, an old former cruise ship that they were on, went down through the canal and over. So he was it was after the war in Europe, and he was on his way to the Pacific when it happened. But for him to be on there, and my uncle and everybody, was quite impressive. I was happy that they got to see it that one time. That was the only time they got to see the ship. We didn't have any Marines assigned to the battleship New Jersey, which was unusual because of the New Jersey and aircraft carriers are what they call capital ships, which are the larger ships, and they always have a Marine detachment. Our captain told the Marines that they were too busy over in country in Vietnam, that he didn't need them to take some of their good Marines and put them on a ship just to follow him around. He had gunner's mates that could do that, so they were more important for them to support their own brothers over in country. So we had no Marines. It was the only time that the battleship New Jersey didn't have Marines assigned. Actually, before the commissioning, we took it to sea for the first time. Before the commissioning, you do what's called sea trials. So we did our sea trials off of New Jersey, Virginia, off there. So we did sea trials and back in and out a couple times in Philadelphia for sea trials. And we had the commissioning, did some more sea trials, and then from there we went to Norfolk. We loaded ammunition in Norfolk for one day and brought all the ammunition, the 16-inch shells, the 5-inch shells, all the ammunition aboard for down off near Norfolk. And then we were in import in Norfolk for a weekend there. And we had what we did all the time. We had what they called an open house for the ship. So anybody that wanted could come to the Navy base and tour the ship. They could only tour the main deck, couldn't go down below unless you were a special guest, the captain or somebody. But we averaged typically tens of thousands of people over the weekend came to visit the ship because of the fact that it was, as I mentioned, the only active battleship, and all the sailors wanted to see it. People that like, so we left. We were in Norfolk, and then we left Norfolk and went down through the Panama Canal, which is it takes a whole day to go through the Panama Canal. We dropped anchor on the Atlantic side, the Gulf side, and they had to take some things off the side of the ship that they pumped out water and stuff, so they had to take those off because the canal is 110 feet wide, the ship is 108 feet wide. So you've got a foot or less on each side of the ship to get through there, and it was intentionally built that way so that you could use the canal. So that took a day. We had stopped on the other side for the night at our first Liberty, and then we went from there straight up to Long Beach, and that was our home port for that summer of '68, where we did more training off the coast of California. Went in and out pretty much every week. We would leave on Monday, come back on Friday, and we would be in port for the weekend and restock. And guys would have Liberty, and then we'd go back out to sea for the next week we do more Navy bombardment training for the gunners, mates, engineering training. You know, we do general quarter drills, and they had inspectors come on board, and they would do scenarios with us and come down to the engine room and say, tell some guy standing there, that just happened to your equipment, what are you going to do? And you had to react and do it just like it was, and you had to tell other people, and they had to react. So it was all the training that you have to operate a ship of that size. And then it was from there on, it was, and once that was done, and we had a family cruise where the family went out for a day. You could invite your family, and then in August or early September, we left for Vietnam. Left and went to Pearl Harbor, stopped there and did more tours there, and then on to Subic Bay in the Philippines, and on to the gun line off the coast of Vietnam. On September 30th was our first day on the gun line over there. Well, when we got to the gun line, we got to off the coast of Vietnam. Obviously, it was typical temperatures, warm, hot, sunny day. A lot of press on the ship. There was an unbelievable amount of press that came along to be, you know, to witness it. It was a big thing. The first time the battleship had fired what they call fired in anger. So we got our first. They went to general quarters first time when we were off of there. Just, you know, so at my general quarter station was down in number 3 engine room on the switchboard, electrical switchboard down there. So anytime we were on general quarters, I never got to see the guns fire or anything. That was all. But they went to general quarters, they get a request from in-country request for shore bombardment for certain things, whether it was tunnels or all kinds of, you know, movement of enemy troops on roads, railroads, bridges. So the New Jersey could fire 23 miles, a 2,000-pound shell, 23 miles. So we got our first call for fire, and we fired the first guns. All the press got pictures of it, interviewed the captain, talked to all that. So you saw a lot of press. And they were eventually helicoptered off, and we were just out there doing our job. That, you know, which was 24 hours a day, all the time. We were off sitting on what they called the gun line. You know, we operated at the beginning. We operated off the coast of North Vietnam. Bombing the North was still open, and then Johnson changed that. President Johnson closed the bombing of the North, and we moved down to what they call I Corps, which was off of just south of the DMZ, off shore of Vietnam. And we were in as close as you know, half a mile off the coast to 5 or 6 miles off the coast, depending on where we were firing and who we were firing in support of. We fired in support of mostly Marines off in what they call the I Corps, up near the EM2. So my general quarter station, like I mentioned, was in number 3 engine room. And I was on this, what they call the switchboard, where we controlled the generators. So our job was to control both the generators that were in our space, what they call the ship service generators, the electrical generators that made the power to operate the ship, operate the guns. You needed electrical power to operate the guns, especially the main turrets and the 5-inch mounts, which was our main armament, 16-inch turrets. So we had the electrical plant on the ship consisted of 8 ship service generators, 1,250 kW each. So we could make enough power to burn every light in a small city. It was a massive amount of electrical power that we could produce in these generators. So when we were at general quarters, they lit off all 8 of them. And we had 8 main boilers, 2 in each fire room. So we had fire rooms and engine rooms. We had 4 fire rooms, 4 engine rooms. And each fire room where the boilers were supported that other engine room. But the way the ship was constructed, you could cross-connect all. If you lost an engine room or you lost something, you could cross-connect and get power from a different generator. It was all kinds of repetitive and backup systems that were available as far as the circuiting and the wiring and the steam lines and the water lines and all that. So the ship was basically made to survive whatever happened to it down to the last boiler and the last generator, the last gun. So, but our job was pretty much to just keep the generators online, watch the load on it, make sure you're not overloaded, things like that. Sometimes you'd hear just from other sailors where we were and what we were doing, and who we were supporting. You know, what Marine battalion, what Marine group it was. It was First Marines, or sometimes it was Korean Marines, South Vietnam Army. So you'd get things like that. We did have a newspaper on the ship. It was published every day called the Bugle, which is a thing with battleships. Typically, in the past, always had buglers, where most ships don't. They either piped it with the bosun's pipe, or they had a recording of a bugler. We actually had a bugler. We had two guys that they wore a little patch of a little bugle, and they would sound things over the PA system, you know. And so that's why they named the newspaper the Bugle, because it gave you all the information. And they would have, it was a small newspaper printed in our print shop every day, and they'd walk around and hand them out to the different shops, and you'd have a pile of them in there, and they'd give you some information of what we did the day before, or what was going on back in the States, what was the latest, who was, what baseball team or NFL football team was, what the scores were, and this and that. So it was, you always look forward to the paper coming out. We had a TV station that would give us, they had news. We had a closed circuit TV station on the ship with a TV studio that would interview people and give news reports in the evening, and obviously play movies. They always had movies playing on the TV too in the evening, during the night, through the night, and things like that. So you found out eventually where you were and what you were doing. We electricians we had our what we called E division sleeping, E division berthing, and it was one of we thought one of the better areas, because there was a ladder that went down to it, which in the Navy you say a ladder, but it's basically a steep stairs, and you went down into our compartment, but there was no passageway through our compartment, so we were isolated in this one compartment on the third deck. So you start with the main deck, and then you have the second deck down, the third deck down, and if you're on a ship, so from the main deck, the second, third, and fourth are down. If you're going up into the superstructure, you have the main deck, and then you have the O1 level, O2, so they put an O above it. When you're going up, there are levels going up, decks going down, type of thing. But we were in a nice compartment, and there were all the electricians stayed in that one compartment. Our racks were 4 high, and they were basically a ring of pipe with springs across it, and a mattress that was maybe 2 or 3 inches, couple inches high. But you could pull them up, and they hung from the top one down. Each one was changed. It was pivoted on the inside on a pole, and the outside could be tipped up for them to clean and things like that underneath it and all that. Living condition were pretty good. We all had a locker there, good size lot, nice size locker. We had a special locker for our pea coats, which was the heavy wool coats that Navy sailors wear. So you didn't have to try to put that in your regular locker. You could keep that hung up. Some guys would keep a set of dress blues or set of dress whites that they would use for inspections only, and they would keep those in those lockers. And all your regular dungarees and your regular clothes you wear if you went out on liberty when you were in port, you would just keep in your locker and all that stuff. But they had tables down there. They had a TV. Our compartment had a TV, so we'd sit there and watch a movie every night. Or they actually had movies on the mess decks too. You could go back and they would do it on a larger screen, or you could watch movies or TV shows. If you were in port, they would hook they had an antenna, they would show the local TV on local TV channels on our TV system. But you know, the guys were down there, and you'd sit around and talk, play cards. There was always a card game going on, you know, especially right after payday. You know, so some guys would lose all their pay the first, you know, first card game. But it was you know, typically you know, almost, you know, it was similar to a family. Like you were there with all your brothers and uncles and cousins and everything, and sitting around watching TV, talking, whatever. You know, so you worked together, you played together, you slept together, you went out on liberty together, you ate your meals together. It was pretty much a family that you got used to. Our food was really quite very good. You know, we had good meals, good healthy meals. Good. Seldom got down to where we were short of this or short of that. We were in and out enough times, and we also replenished at sea at that time. So we would leave the gun line and go out, and they would bring on new stores and new stock when we replenished, and they would also replenish and redo the ammunition and fuel and all that. And that was a constant. Every 2 days we would do some type of replenishment, it seemed like. The food was good. The desserts were good. So we always had hot coffee on the mess decks. Breakfast was probably my favorite. You could just get pretty much really good breakfast. They had 3 meals a day, and then they had what they called mid-rats. At midnight they would put out eggs and food out at midnight. So if you had the mid-watch, midnight to 4 in the morning, you'd go get something to eat before you went down. If you had the 8 to 4 or 8 to midnight, you would stop at the mess decks on your way back to your rack to go to sleep and grab a roll or whatever, some eggs. So they always had something. Some of it was leftovers from dinner. Sometimes it was different, but we had good food, good meals at Thanksgiving, the holidays, turkeys, and you know, we had Bob Hope on board for Christmas, so we had a really good lunch that time. They ate lunch with us Christmas Day, his whole thing. So they were a little extra for that. You know, but our Christmas had turkey, ham, and Thanksgiving had turkey and ham and stuffing and dressing, and you know, it was amazing what the cooks could make for 1,600 guys. You know, really had good meals. We were, you know, Thanksgiving was, like I said, they decorated, like on the mess decks, they'd do a little extra, and then for Thanksgiving dinner was just like what we'd have at home, everything you'd have at home. For Thanksgiving you had there on the ship, and you could get your white meat or your dark meat or whatever. You had your mashed potatoes, your squash, your gravy, your sweet potatoes, all of that. So they had good hearty Thanksgiving meals. Christmas was special. Yeah, a lot of people got what they call care packages from home. The parents and their girlfriends or wives and kids would send packages over of Christmas cookies and Christmas gifts for them, and so you got that. Guys in different divisions had artificial trees in their shop, and they decorate the tree. And the county, Orange County, where Long Beach was, in one of the malls there, they put up a great big banner that was, I don't know how long, it was probably 20 feet long and 6 foot high, and they had anybody that wanted to could write a little note on their residence, and it said "Merry Christmas to the Battleship New Jersey," and people would sign their name on there and send it, and they rolled it all up and shipped it over to us, and they had that on display there. And so little things from home that you got. You couldn't call. They didn't have email then. Now it's different. Guys can send emails back and forth off the ship and things like that. But we had to wait till we got in port and go to the phone booth to call home. It wasn't cell phones. There wasn't email or internet or any of that stuff. So, but the holidays were always special. Everybody did tried to do what you did at home. that was a big thrill when we heard that Bob Hope was going to come on board, and we were hoping, because we all knew we were the only battleship over there at Christmas time. So we said, "Wow, we got a good shot of having him finally come on our ship." So. And so he did his typical Christmas show, and I think he had Anne Margaret was his top performer there. He had, back in those days, you had the Dean Martin show, which had what they called the Gold Diggers on it, which was a group of girl dancers and singers. They came, and different groups out of that. We had football player Rosie Greer came. They had the Les Brown and his Band of Renown, which was the band that traveled with Bob Hope, and he did his typical skit up on. They took turret one of the forward and turned it sideways, so the barrels were pointing out to the side, and gave it nice wides. They built a stage up on top of the turret, and all the spectators were up on the bow from the turret forward or up above it, and then turret 2 had the guns raised over the top of him, so he was performing under the guns of turret 2, and it was funny. It was interesting to watch, because they had some towers built out of staging up in front of them, and that's where he had all his cue cards and the cameras and everything, and filming it all. So they filmed a lot of it the whole day there, and then, like I said, they stayed and had lunch with us, and cooks made a big cake, and they cut the cake, and they sat down. All the performers sat down in mess decks, different tables. They didn't just congregate; they sat at different tables with the sailors and talked to them. And it was really made it kind of special to have them aboard. They came aboard by helicopter, obviously. Were there for quite a while, and then they left us and went to I think one of the aircraft carriers. They flew from us to the aircraft. While they were having lunch, they were moving all the equipment to the next place where he performed, so by helicopter. That going on. The captain was as I said before, was a sailor's sailor. They call it sailor. His crew was his top part of what he wanted to take care of on that ship. But he used to, he started a program where he invited Marines out. They would take a squad of Marines that just came in from patrol out in the jungles of Vietnam, maybe 12 people, 12, 24 or something like that, a number, and they would put them on a helicopter and fly them out to the ship. And they would come on board, and they'd be all mud and everything, and they'd give them all new uniforms, wash their existing uniforms. They would go down. They had their own berthing area. They'd come out for 3 or 4 days, like a little short R&R, rest and relaxation, they called it. They would just do whatever they wanted on the ship. They could just sit there, or they could sleep all the time, or they give them new uniforms. They could go down to the mess decks at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and order a steak, and they'd cook them a steak, or whatever. So, and they wandered around and got to talk to him, because he wanted us to know who we were supporting, and he wanted them to know that we were out there for them. Them to get a little, interaction between us, because when you're sitting off the coast, you just, like we used to say, we sat off the coast and watched the war, because you could see the planes dropping bombs and inland, and we were firing, but you didn't have the connection of being right in there, in country. So this helped us really learn from the people, the guys that were actually in country, what we needed to know about them, and they needed to know that we were there for them. So it was pretty impressive. We had small boats come out that would then they swap. We'll give you this Vietnamese gun, and you give us 5 pounds of coffee. They'd pull up and we refuel them, things like that. So we were always being visited by somebody, it seemed like. So we had a helicopter deck on there that was constantly active, of helicopters coming and going. They actually, the bosuns painted New Jersey International on it, and they used to announce flights coming in and out with flight numbers like they would at the airport. It got them kind of neat. They would say flight such and such coming from Da Nang, arriving, such and such things. So they're taking off. So they tried to make it a little personal as far as being a little different. personnel and supplies. We used to get quite a few, lots of, all the military officers wanted to visit the ship. We had Army, Marines, we had Vietnamese Army and generals and admirals and all kinds of people that constantly wanted to just come out and be on the ship, visit the ship and meet with the captain. And so there were always constantly that going on. Well, we were typically, our deployments to the gun line. Like I said, when we first got over there, we went to Subic Bay in the Philippines, which was the largest, one of the larger Navy bases over there. And we would stock up, with supplies and fuel and stuff like that. Then we would go to the gun lines, and we were typically out there maybe 2-3 weeks at a time. Except the very first time we went out there, we kept getting extended. There was more. They wanted more support here or more support there. I think we were on the gun line like 56 days the first time we went out to the gun line, and we would go back to the Philippines. Philippines were probably our biggest port we went to. We would go back and forth, and like I said, we would go back for Liberty for the crew primarily, and to do any repairs that we couldn't do ourselves. The yards that would do it. But as I mentioned before, every day or two we would leave the gun line, go out for a couple hours, and get restocked from supply ships. Either ammo ships, oilers, or ones that buy the provisions, fuel. And sometimes we'd be getting fuel from a fuel tank or fuel ship next to us, and they'd be bringing supplies by helicopter and dropping them on the big nets down onto the helo deck full of supplies. So we were always getting supplied on a regular basis. The other port we went to was Yokosuka, Japan. One time we went up there, and we were there for a week, a little over a week, I think. So we left the gun line, went up to Yokosuka. We went to Yokosuka Naval Base up there in Japan for a week, and then back to the gun line for a while. Our longest, our biggest thing probably as far as where we visited was Singapore. We left the gun line, went down, dipped below the equator so they could do the shellback ceremony for anybody who hadn't crossed the equator yet. That's a whole day ceremony. They run the ones that have already crossed, initiate the ones that haven't crossed, and everybody becomes a shellback. And then we went to Singapore for a week in Singapore, a little over a week in Singapore for Liberty, basically just for Liberty. We had to anchor out at that point, so we had Liberty boats that took us in and out to the shore, and then back to the gun line again. So I had figured it out one time that we actually spent 127 days on the gun line at different times, and all those 127 days we were firing 24 hours a day whenever we needed to. So they have a lot of records in actually in what they call the 1968 narrative, 1969 narrative is like a day-by-day thing of what the ship did, and at the end it had all the information on how many shells we fired in that month, that year, and how much fuel we took aboard, how much all this information. So we left when we were done. Was April of our last day on the gun line was April 1st, and that was intentional by the captain. Our first day was September 30th. Our last day was April 1st. If you spent one day in the war zone, which was where the gun line, you got all your pay for that month, tax-free, and you got what they called hazardous duty pay, which was an extra for the whole month. So being there on the September 30th, we got it retroactive all the way back, and being there April 1st, we got it for the whole month of April. So we left the gun line on April 1st, and we went to Yokosuka, Japan. Got ready, left Japan, and we started back to the States with 3 destroyers and the aircraft carrier Coral Sea. We all finished our deployment at the same time, and we headed back to the States together. Coral Sea was stationed out of San Francisco, so that was their destination. The destroyers were either out of Long Beach, where we were, or San Diego. But we got about 4 days out of Long Beach, and we had just a couple of days before we had pulled up next to the Coral Sea. The captains talked, and they pulled up next to each one to take pictures of each other. You know, the aircraft, they wanted good pictures of a battleship. You know, so we did that, and they sent up a helicopter, and they got some really nice pictures from above that you'll see. It's quite a bit online, a lot. And then our last payday was at sea. We were standing in line, and then you could feel the ship starting to pick up speed. The engines, you could feel them, it was starting to rumble a little bit. Captain came on the 1MC, which was our public address system, and he says, I hate to tell you this, but we just got orders to return to the Western Pacific. And we turned around 180 degrees and went back to Japan. So when we got that, and that was in that year and that time, the North Koreans shot a United Nations plane down. And all the people on the plane were killed. And, you know, they said they did it in their airspace. So Nixon was president then, I believe, and he started a task force to go into the Sea of Japan to be ready if, you know, decide what they were going to do about this incident that happened. So they turned the battleship New Jersey around, because we were the only one, and sent us all the way back to Japan. We had offloaded all our ammunition. We had to reload all our ammunition, which was a whole day thing, being next to an ammo ship, reload by Highline across. The Coral Sea just kept right on going. The destroyers kept right on going home, and we turned around, went back to Japan. We went in for 2 or 3 hours. The captain left, went to a meeting, came back, and we got underway and went just off the coast of Japan. We were out in the sea lanes out there, and then a few days later we got orders to head east. You know, it calmed down a little bit, so we started back. We got back 19 days late. And unfortunately, a lot of the families had traveled to Long Beach to meet their sailor on the day they were supposed to get back. So the Navy base at Long Beach and the city of Long Beach took it hard to give them places to stay and everything. They took care of the families that were waiting for their sailors. And we got back, like I said, not in May. We were back 19 days late, but and then we were in port. We did the first month we were there. We were only had to be on the ship when you had duty. Other than that, you could stay on the shore. You know, a lot of guys got apartments or stayed in the YMCA in Long Beach or some of the places that they have for the sailors to be able to stay. And you just go to the beach and relax and enjoy it. And then eventually we got back to work, getting things ready for our next one. We did a midshipman cruise where the midshipmen from Annapolis come on board, and we went from Long Beach to San Francisco to Tacoma, Washington, to Pearl Harbor, to San Diego, and back to Long Beach. So you just take them out on a cruise, and they learn what they need to learn about being on a ship. So you had potential officers working for you, or depending on what grade they were in. Depending on the freshmen, the younger ones worked down in the engine rooms and worked with the sailors, and as they, if they were a senior there, they would work with the officers probably up on the bridge or whatever they were planning on getting into. So we did that, and then we were pretty much just getting all our supplies and getting ready to go on our second deployment. We were supposed to leave in August for our second deployment. So what happened? Well, I was still on the ship, and I hadn't got orders. And we got within a month of leaving Long Beach to go back over to the Western Pacific when Department of the Navy announced that they were going to be decommissioning a group of ships, and the New Jersey was first one on the list. So we were all stocked up, all ready to go, all our supplies on board. Like I said, less than 30 days to get underway. And those orders came out. We had a change of command. Our Captain Snyder left. Captain Patterson was taken over. So and he had just taken over, or was just going to take over when the word came out. So we went from, you know, all our excitement of going over to the depression of having to take her up and take her out of service up in Bremerton, Washington. So there's a lot. There were different rumors of why they thought that, but the biggest rumor people say, and the thing that people think that really happened, was the North Vietnamese would not talk at the Paris peace talk if the New Jersey came back, because we had such an impact on their army. You know, the Marines in country would sell us that, you know, as soon as you fired the first shell from the New Jersey, they realized what it was, and they would just pack up and leave wherever they were. So the word around the ship was, but that was one of the reasons that they needed to have us out, so they could continue the peace talks over in Paris. So we packed up everything and went up to Bremerton, Washington, and decommissioned the ship, got it all ready for decommissioning, you know, did what you had to do for that. And, December 15th, I think it was December 15th, we decommissioned it. So I was on it from the pre-commissioning to the decommissioning. So it was my best ship that I was on right there, beginning to end. Next I got assigned to a guided missile destroyer out of San Diego. So I went home on leave, for 2 weeks leave, to New York. I said I lived in New York, flew cross country to there. And my orders were to go to San Diego. The ship, the USS Hull, which was DDG-13, was actually over in the Westpac, on a deployment over to Vietnam. So, but my orders were to go to San Diego and wait for it. It was supposed to be back in March. So I went to San Diego, and I was an E5 second class, which was the highest rate I could get in my 4 years. And so I went into what they call the transit barracks there. So I would go to quarters every morning, and typically they would get working parties of non-rated ones or E4s or something, and then it would say, okay, we'll see you guys tomorrow morning, and I'd just go to the beach, whatever. I had some other friends that were from the New Jersey that were on ships down in San Diego, and we'd get together. And except for one morning, they called my name and they said, you know, get your stuff together and report to base personnel. You know, I said, well, I wonder what, you know, maybe it's back earlier, so it was in February, actually end of January. And I went there, and the guy, they told him who I was and everything, and he said, okay, just a minute, and he comes back with this envelope, white envelope. He says, okay, here's all your records and everything, and here's your plane ticket. And I said, well, plane ticket to where? He said, San Francisco. I said, why? He said, oh, you're going over to meet your ship. So I flew from San Diego to San Francisco, and San Francisco to, they had what they call MAC flights, which were civilian airlines, but they were all military people on them. It was Military Airlift Command. And this was a Braniff International flight, and they had stewardesses, regular flight, but they were all coach. There was no first class or anything. Got on there and flew to Hawaii, spent a couple hours there, and then flew to Air Force Base in Japan, Yokota Air Force Base in Japan. And I had my orders with me and everything, and I walked up to this window, the Navy personnel check in, and I said, you know, the guy looked at it, got out this big computer printout, the old fan type green and white printout thing that came out of the printers, and looked, he said, your ship's not here, it's in, so let me check, and he comes back, he says, oh, it's in Okinawa, but we got a flight, I left on Wednesday at 10:30 at night, and I got in Japan Friday morning at 6:30 or something because of the date change and all that. And he says, it's Okinawa, we got a flight though leaving at 8:30 for Okinawa. So got a ticket for that one, got on there, flew to Okinawa, checked in again. They said, no, it's not here, it's in Da Nang, in the harbor in Da Nang right now. And I said, okay, so how do I get there? And he said, well, we got a flight leaving Sunday morning at 6:30. So that's good, where do I stay? He said, well, you can't stay here, this is the Air Force, you got to go to the Navy base on the other side of the island. So got to get on a Navy bus, go over there, checked in there. I said, I got to be back at the air base by 6 o'clock. The guy says, okay, we'll have a car here to take you back. Somebody will be here to take you back. He says, make sure you put in for someone to wake you up. I said, okay. So I did that. Got up, the guy woke me up, I got up, walked down, and there was a 40 Econoline van, Navy van sitting there, and the guy drove me back over to the Air Force Base and got on, flew into Da Nang Air Force Base. I got there, and they said, it's not here, it's gone out on the gun line, so, but it was supposed to be back. So I said, okay, so what do I do? So they sent me to a construction battalion, Camp Tenshaw in Da Nang, CB base, and I spent 10 days there, not doing anything, because I was, they just muster for quarters and go to a show or go to the rifle range or go to archery, or they had a big slot car track. I actually met a guy that I went to A school with there, going into the EM club. He was in shore patrol, and he was on guard in front of the EM club when I walked by him. He said, come here, buddy. I got to hang around with him for a while. And then I got orders one morning, they called my name again, and they said, hey, your ship's found your ship. And I said, oh, yeah, where is it? He said, Subic Bay. So I had to fly from Da Nang to Saigon, spent a night in Saigon, flew to Subic Bay, finally reported to the ship in Subic Bay. So I spent, I don't know how many weeks trying to catch up with it, but finally did. And then we went out to the gun line one time, a lot smaller. Yeah, it was. I found it interesting though, but it was a lot smaller, a lot closer thing, and it was a newer ship. It was built in the 60s, 62, I think, something like that. So it had a lot of newer electrical technology than I had. On the New Jersey was all World War II equipment, all the motors and motor controllers, a lot of that. This one here had some electronic controls, things like that, more speed controls on some of the motors and pumps than we had on the New Jersey. Was just on and off, and that was it. Or they might have 2 or 3 speeds, but this you could control. So I learned more things on there than I didn't learn on the World War II ship on the New Jersey. So it helped me. This was a guided missile, so we had missiles on there and smaller guns and everything, and a lot smaller shop. And at my rate, I was in charge of the electrician. At that time, I had the first class had left, and then the chief had left actually at one time for a few weeks. So I was the lead electrician on the ship, and then we got a new chief petty officer, and he tried like heck to get me to stay in, but it didn't work. So it was a lot different than being on a big capital ship like the battleship, and rode a lot different. New Jersey just learned to cut through the water, just rode on the top of the water. So whichever way the ocean pushed it, it went. So went to Japan and came back to the States. So I was 5 more days on the gun line, back to the United States. Pearl Harbor. We went to Guam, Pearl Harbor, and then back to San Diego. So then I spent the summer of 70 in San Diego. That was my next ship, and then I got out in November of 70. They let me get out 120 days early out of the Navy because the ship was leaving. So I got out of the Navy on Thursday, and the ship left on Friday to go back over to Vietnam. So I had a choice of either staying on and flying home or get out early and be home for Christmas.